Hi, I'm Urvashi Pithre, and today I'm going to tell you how to get the most out of your pressure cooking. Now it's going to be a little bit nerdy because we're going to talk about the Maillard reaction and you're wondering why you should care. I'll tell you why you should care. You should care because it's going to make you a better and a more efficient cook. So this is the reason why I don't pre-brown my vegetables and my meats. And once we get through this presentation, you probably won't ever do that again either. So here's what we're going to cover today. The first thing we're going to cover is to talk about what the Maillard reaction is. Then we're going to talk about the implications for pressure cooking, and then I'm going to give you a few recipes that leverage this. Most of these recipes can be found on my blog, twoslevers.com, but let's talk about what the Maillard reaction is and how things work. Okay, so here's how it basically works. A Maillard reaction is a chemical reaction that occurs when you apply heat to a food. So what's going to happen when you start to heat up food is that all of these amino acids in the meat, all of the proteins in the meat will start to get heated and they'll start to form a web of flavors. As that web propagates, it spawns off more and more and more webs, all of which contain layers of flavor. They contain aroma molecules, they contain flavor layers, and they contain things that make the food look brown. This is the whole process of cooking if you look at it from a scientific perspective and try to understand what's going on. Now, I do want to differentiate between browning and caramelizing. For caramelizing, all you need is the sugar in the food. But for browning, you also need protein to be present in the food. So browning and caramelization, they look like the same, but they don't taste the same. And that's the reason why. So here's how typically this would happen. So typically what would happen is you would have a very dry environment and you would apply really high heat in an alkaline environment. So think about a cast iron pan, super hot, right? Super hot, dry heat, and sometimes, the meat has a little baking soda or something. When you're cooking Chinese food, for example, you might put a little bit of baking soda in it. You're trying to create an alkaline environment because in this environment, you get more of the Maillard reaction, you get more flavor, more browning that occurs. But here's the thing, is that typically the reason that it has to be dry is because Maillard occurs at a very, very high temperature. Now, in a pressure cooker, there's a way to hack this, which we're going to get to. So we'll understand why in a pressure cooker you don't need to brown your food. So as I mentioned earlier, as this chemical reaction is spawned, essentially what's happening is a web of flavors being created. This web of flavor keeps deepening the more you brown. Now, of course, we all know we can brown too much. We've all burnt our food. We're trying to get to flavor and not burn, okay? So as heat is applied, more and more flavor is created. Now, depending on the food, different flavor profiles are created. This is why a brown steak doesn't taste like brown bread. That's either unfortunate or fortunate, depending on your viewpoint. But the particular qualities of the food have a flavor associated with it. And browning just tends to bring that flavor out more and more and more. Let's talk about sort of the pressure cooker. Let me just recap what I've just said about the Maillard reaction. It typically occurs in a dry environment when you have high alkalinity and you're essentially using the proteins in the food. Those proteins and the sugars get heated. It creates a web of flavor. The web propagates. Let's talk about pressure cooking. What happens in a pressure cooker? In a pressure cooker, the boiling point of water is increased. So as pressure is applied, water now no longer boils at 212. It boils closer to 230, 240, etc. So think of this as superheated water, okay? The water keeps getting hotter and hotter and hotter, but it's not boiling your meats and it's not boiling your vegetables. Okay, now remember what I said. Maillard occurs as temperatures go higher. So 230 and up, you start to see some Maillard. Now, realistically, at 350, you'll get a whole lot more browning and a whole lot more flavor being generated. But Maillard isn't an all or nothing thing. So when you put your food in a pressure cooker, essentially that superheated water, the superheated environment in that pressure cooker starts to create the Maillard even in a moist environment. And this is the most critical thing to understand, is that the only reason it needs to be dry heat otherwise is because there is no way under a non-pressure situation to get the temperatures high enough without having your water boil unless it's in a pressure cooker. What this means from a cooking point of view is you see all those recipes where people are asking you to pre-brown your food, brown the meats, brown the vegetables, do all of this stuff. Guess what? You don't need to do any of that. The pressure cooker is going to do all of that for you. The problem is that many of the recipe writers that you may be following, what they're doing is they're cooking just the way they did on the stovetop. They're just finishing off cooking the meat in a pressure cooker. But if you really wanted to be smart and be ruthlessly efficient, which we all want to be, you wouldn't do this. You would not brown the food. You would put the food in the pressure cooker, let the pressure cooker do all the hard work that is needed. Now, here's when you might still want to brown. So I have a recipe on twoslevers.com for a gyro recipe. It's like you make this gyro meatloaf, and then you can make, sandwiches, put it in pita bread, do all of these wonderful things with it. Okay, here's the thing. It tastes fine, but it doesn't look great. It comes out looking like this grayish lump of meat, which is not very attractive. In a situation like that, for cosmetic purposes, you might want to brown the food afterwards. So you can always reverse brown, but initially don't take the time to brown your meats, brown your vegetables. And there's two problems with it. One is it's a waste of time, but here are a few other problems. Now, pressure cooking needs a certain amount of water, okay? So you'll see recipes that say, oh, you must have at least a cup of water. You must have a cup of liquid, but you don't have to be adding all that liquid. Some of that liquid is going to come from meats and vegetables. So non-starchy vegetables, such as green beans, let's see, green beans, cauliflower, asparagus, onions, ginger, garlic, all of these, greens, all of these will, quote, leach water. They'll let water out. Things like sweet potatoes, etc., starchy vegetables will absorb water. Rice will absorb water to cook. So that's the big difference. But most of the time, these vegetables will release their own very flavorful, very deep, rich broth into the pressure cooker. What happens if you brown it? What happens if you brown it ahead of time? If you brown it ahead of time, you're taking all that moisture out. You're taking all the moisture out by browning it. You're trying to brown this meat when you don't need to, brown the vegetables when you don't need to. And then because you need water, you're putting in plain tap water. So you've taken all the flavor out that you could have had from the natural vegetable, the natural meat flavor that you would have had, and you're adding water. So that's one problem. First, you're doing too much work. You're browning things that don't need to be. Second, you're taking out the flavorful broths and waters in it, and now you're adding plain water. But here's a third problem. A lot of times, especially for novices, when you brown in a pressure cooker, electric pressure cookers are much smarter than you and I are. So they are set up so that they don't seal, that they won't cook if something is stuck to the bottom, because the pressure cooker thinks, oh, something burnt in here. This could be a problem. So you'll get a burn notice. So what really has to happen is if you brown something and you get this fond that has all the flavor, you really need to put in enough water to deglaze it and scrape it off. If you don't do that, you're getting a burn notice. Okay, so think about what you've just done. You have spent more time browning things, you've taken out all the flavor, and you've increased the chances of things burning when you did not need to do any of that stuff. You could have just put your food in, you could have let it cook on its own. If you didn't like the way it looked, you could have browned it afterwards. This is how you use the science behind pressure cooking, the phenomenon of Maillard, to get rich flavor in a pressure cooker without actually having to brown. So let's talk about some recipes where you use this. So on the blog, again, let me start with an onion masala recipe. So an Indian onion masala, it's called the gila masala, wet masala, is a very, very staple part of Indian cooking. So what you do is you put in onions, ginger, garlic, you roast, you age, you keep roasting this thing, and then you put in tomatoes, and then you roast some more. And this is long, convoluted process. By the time you're finished, you're sick of it. You never want to eat again, for starters. Your hair smells of it, your skin smells of it. It's just a very, very arduous process. But here's the thing, it doesn't need to be. If you would simply take the onions, tomatoes, ginger, garlic, and put it in the pressure cooker with a little bit of water and let it cook, the Maillard reaction will occur, browning will occur, this thing will cook up absolutely beautifully, and you will have done no work at all. I have a few other recipes like that. There's a chicken korma recipe that doesn't require you to do any kind of pre-browning. There's an Ethiopian dorawat recipe. And another one that I have is actually a dessert. It's an Indian kheer recipe. So kheer is, a dessert made out of milk and sugar. So when you go to an Indian restaurant and they give you this little white, innocuous looking thing at the end of the meal, you say, oh yeah, rice pudding, I'm going to eat this. Well, you're getting a very, very tamed down version of what it should be. What it should be is a very, very deep, rich caramel flavor. Your tongue should be bathed in this thick sauce instead of you drinking what essentially feels like, rice and milk, okay? The way to get that flavor in a pressure cooker is to let it cook, let the milk separate, let the milk solids caramelize a little bit, brown a little bit, and then when you open the pressure cooker, you see this huge mess of rice and, rice and the separated milk, and you wonder why you ever listened to me. Well, if you just do what I tell you in the recipe and stir it up, you're mixing back all that rich flavor flavor that you got from allowing the pressure cooker to create this Maillard reaction and to make this rich, deep flavor. So let me recap this really, really quickly. What you do not need to do is you do not need to brown meats, you do not need to brown vegetables. You put everything in, you pour and cook more than you typically are doing now. If you see a recipe that asks for pre-browning, ask yourself why it is necessary. In what way is it helping develop a flavor? And 9 times out of 10 is probably not helping. So what I would urge you to do is make the recipe as I'm telling you, put the meats and vegetables in, don't brown anything, and taste it. And if it tastes right to you, you've just saved yourself 10 or 15 minutes every time you cook. And it's all about good taste done very, very fast. So I hope this was helpful. I'm Urvashi Pitre. My blog is twosleevers.com, and I thank you for watching.